Our man, how are ya? Well, before we get this started, a lot of people say that when a man sees a woman that he's attracted to, they have all kinds of things happen to them, and obviously the obvious blood rushing around the body, in the pants, trying to cover up a stiffy, like, oh, I hope they don't see that. And then music playing in their head when they see someone they're attracted to. And I'll tell you what, I'll out myself. I'll openly out myself. There's someone I see sometimes, and they are, when I mean stacked, like, you know when you get those girls and they're curvy, right? But like they're thick curvy, and it's just like nothing on them jiggles. It's quite inspiring actually. And you see it and you're just like, ah, damn, oof. Oh, good lord. And you just, you know, it will hurt your hand, but still you want to do it. You might break some fingers, but god damn it, it's worth it. Anyway, I see this one person particularly walk by sometimes, and I'll tell you what plays in my head. This. I'm telling you. Just that hook right there. Oh wow. So how am I going to talk about MMA now when I've just been thinking about that one? Listen, I'm going to need a cold shower. Or maybe I'll roll around in the snow, that will cool me down. So, what I wanted to talk about was this Nick Diaz, George St Pierre fight card that's happening in March. And this feels like a fight that we've been talking about for years now. I remember people talking about this in 2010. In fact, I remember people talking about this way before it was even a dream fight, when the UFC were building the 170 division and they had a lot of young talent, and there was Diaz and St Pierre and Kyra Parisian and Robbie Lawler, who was a welterweight at the time. And I remember people talking about doing that fight back then, and it never happened. And then things changed and Nick rebuilt himself, and he went to Strikeforce and he rebuilt himself even more, destroyed Frank Shamrock, became a dominant 170 pounder in that company's weight division, that company's version of 170, and he even called out George St Pierre when George was there at a Strikeforce show once. And things progressed and things happened, and George dominated his weight class, and people kept saying there's no one left for George. And then things went the way they did, and they ended up having the same owner, and it looked like we would see St Pierre and Diaz, and it looked like we were going to see it back then. And to be honest, let's not cover the backstory, let's cut straight to the chase. This is an interesting fight for a number of reasons. It's interesting for me because not only are the skills and how the fight visually is going to be interests me, but there's something about the personalities and mindsets of both fighters that it's just, you have to see it. You have to see how they're going to interact with each other when they're at press conferences or when they have to do these primetime specials and media appearances. There's something about the way that they are perceived that is just fascinating. And to me, that is going to be, for me, a determining factor as to who's going to win the fight. Now, a lot of people question George's mental state or mindset when he fights. A lot of people have accused George of being weak-minded. A lot of people have accused George of being a guy that can break in fights. And a lot of people believe that Nick Diaz is the guy to do that. Now, do I believe that George is breakable? I believe that George can be rattled. I do believe that George can be shaken. And if there's a personality to do it, it would be Nick Diaz. Because of how Nick comes across and because of the mind games his camp will willingly play to get under George's skin. And we have seen George get rattled before in the mental warfare in the lead up to a fight. He got rattled a bit by BJ Penn when BJ started talking in the primetime specials. He was definitely rattled when Koscheck was the co-coach. You could tell that George was getting irritated by it. Now, Diaz is a different level of mental warfare and mind game player. Diaz will get under his skin. We have seen Diaz intimidate fighters. We have seen Diaz break fighters. We have seen at weigh-ins how Nick carries on sometimes, and that can rattle a lot of people. You'd be surprised how many people, great fighters, would get rattled by that. Look at how Paul Daly was. Paul Daly was going back and forth with him, and then Diaz beat him and broke him mentally. And that's another thing. When Diaz beats guys, it's not like he just beats them. he puts a hell of a beating on them, and then they start thinking about retiring. I mean, he did it to BJ Penn, he did it to Paul Daly, he did it to a legend like Frank Shamrock. I mean, KJ Noons even started talking funny after Diaz beat him. It was quite interesting that Nick can have that effect on people, and a lot of people think that that's going to happen with George. And the thing is about Nick's mindset is that Nick is a guy that he's fierce, he's hostile towards people, he's perceived as basically the polar opposite of what George is. People don't view Nick as humble, people don't view Nick as this quiet, polite person. They believe Nick to be this loud, brash, fierce, take no shit, take no prisoners type of guy. And that is part of the charm to Nick, that he is that. But also in addition to that, that kind of comes into his fighting style, because when Nick fights guys, he goes after them. When he fought Paul Daly, everyone said Nick should just take him down to the ground, and he should just take him down and sub him. Nick instead got right in his face and said, "What, smile, bitch," and started beating him up on the feet and knocked him out. And Nick is that kind of person. Nick will press forward, and he can get under people's skin in that way. And I wouldn't be surprised, listen, one person said it on YouTube, it was Bloodstain Lane, if Nick fought Anderson Silva, it wouldn't be unwise to bet some money on Nick to win that fight, because Nick will go after you. If Nick were to fight John Jones, I would say this, and this is a bold statement to make, Nick would go after John Jones. If Nick were to fight, if there was a burning house on fire and there was something in there for Nick to get, I can imagine Nick just running right through and getting that thing and not giving a shit about getting burnt. And that's the interesting thing about Nick. He doesn't necessarily give a shit about what you know, who you think you are or what you think you can do to him, because Nick will just, he don't care. He'll come after you. Case in point, when he fought Takanori Gomi. When he fought Takanori Gomi, Gomi was considered to be the best lightweight in the world. And now I know a lot of fans now who've seen him in the UFC probably don't think that. Oh, that chubby Asian guy with the dyed hair, you sure? Trust me, Gomi was a killer back in the day. Gomi was one of the best pound for pound fighters in the world at one point. And Nick fought him, and Gomi was the favourite, but Nick outboxed him, took him down and subbed him, just destroyed the guy. And that's the kind of thing that Nick can do to people. And don't be surprised if Nick, if he wins, does that to George. Now, on the other hand, when I think about the mental game of George is very honest about how he feels. And I think that's going to be the key to him winning this fight, is him being honest and self-aware about all the potential things that could happen with the Diaz camp and the interactions with Diaz, and making himself aware of how he's going to feel. Diaz is going to get under his skin. Diaz might rattle him. His camp might rattle him. There's going to be so many things. And if George doesn't prepare himself mentally for how he's going to feel like that and know how to deal with it, then George will break in the fight, and Nick will be the guy that does it to him. If you're talking about skills, I think they're both quite evenly matched, except the one thing that Nick has a problem with is wrestling. And we've seen in his early UFC career, he lost 3 fights because he kept getting taken down. And Nick is quite willing, he'll allow himself to be taken down, but I don't know if that's a game he wants to play, because we've seen it recently. When guys get taken down, they're defending well off the back and controlling well off the back, but the fight doesn't go their way, and then the decision ends up going to somebody else. And I don't know if Nick wants to do that. Really, the key is for Nick to keep the fight standing, because Nick's got effective stand-up. He attacks the body for a while, he attacks the midsection, he makes it harder for the guy to breathe and move around, and then he starts going for the head. George has got good stand-up, effective stand-up, and I can see George doing what Ben Henderson did to Nate Diaz, throwing a ton of leg kicks, or what Condit did as well, throwing a lot of leg kicks, throwing a lot of kicks to the upper leg and to the inside leg, and then eventually working for takedowns. And sometimes, let me rephrase that. Let me take 2 seconds back. Let me rewind. Okay. I can see George doing that and frustrating Nick, and Nick not wanting to adjust his game plan. And if George can do that, George will probably win the fight. But I'll tell you what, this is going to be a very, very interesting fight. And the things that are going to happen before the fight are going to be very exciting to watch. Given the kind of course that I do at uni, I'm always watching about how people behave and analysing things like that. So for me, this is just fascinating for a number. It's just fascinating in a number of ways. I mean, I remember being fascinated by Nick Diaz when I think it was around the BJ Penn fight, and he looked like he was all over the shop. He was talking about retiring, he was talking about leaving, he was talking about not earning enough money, he was this weird emotional state. And then the weigh-in happened, and it was like kill switch engaged. She was ready to kill him right there and then on the spot. And to me, that's fascinating to watch. Nick Diaz is a fascinating personality. I think one other person said it's like this train wreck that you can't help but you have to watch. You have to see what's happening. You have to see how it ends, and that is very true of Nick Diaz. And the things that are going to happen, I really want to pay close attention. And I guarantee you, the things that are going to happen are going to get headlines. I genuinely believe that. And the other thing is Nick going to bring out a side in George St Pierre that we haven't seen before? Because a lot of people have said George is going to cower, George is going to break, or George is just going to do the Greg Jackson, game plan, coast to win. Or are we going to see a different side of George's personality? Now, sometimes you have to take these things for a grain of salt when people say things on UFC Prime Time. Remember, Condit told everyone it was going to be a dogfight, and then he fought a completely different fight against Diaz. But we have heard George, and it's been said that George flipped when Nick Diaz called him out at that UFC show back in 2011. That George apparently flipped and went mad and used the words, "I will give this disrespectful punk the worst beating of his entire life." Now that probably is hype talk, but then when you see the primetime special with Condit and Diaz, and when St Pierre's part was in there was something quite serious and somewhat sincere about the way George was talking, when he was talking about having his back against the wall, and when people question his integrity, it brings out a side in him, and he's so dark in his head that you don't even want to know what he thinks about in his head at times. And Nick might push him to the point where he brings that out in him. And that's going to be the other drawing point of the fight. If he brings out this side in George that people want to see, this more aggressive, more violent, more vicious, more dark side of George, that could be very interesting. And I think people want to know if that's going to happen. And if it does happen, people will tune in to see it. Thoughts on the other fights on the card? You've got Jake Ellenberger and Johnny Hendricks. To wrap that one up quickly, I think Hendricks wins. Ellenberger is good. He's got a good wrestling background. He's got dynamic stand-up, as in he'll throw punches, knees, and low kicks and kicks. But I know that he gets tired in fights, and I think Hendricks will grind him out or knock him out, one or the other. But I think Hendricks will win, and if he wins, for the love of God, give the guy the title shot. Just give him the title shot. I mean, he's beaten contender after contender. He is a viable fight to George because he's done things that George hasn't done, i.e. knock out John Fitch in the first round in under 20 seconds. I think just that alone makes him a contender and a viable contender for the belt. Other fights on the card, Roy McDonald, Carlos Condit. What do I think is going to happen? I think that since their last fight, Rory has improved a lot, changed camps, more finer-tuned athlete than he was. He destroyed BJ Penn, although I don't think anyone was surprised by that. And I think that when he fights Condit, I wouldn't be surprised if he wins again in quite dominant fashion. Although I think Condit will fuck with him in the fight. I wouldn't be surprised if Condit bloodies him up like he did in the last fight. And I think he's going to target that area where McDonald cut himself. Because I don't know, I just think he might do that. And he might play some mental games. I think that will be the fight of the night personally. Just based on the way that the two guys fight, it could be fight of the night. So long as we don't have the Greg Jackson game plan, I think it could be a very exciting fight. Other than that, let me know what you think of this fight. Are you as fascinated by this fight as I am? Who do you think is going to win? What do you think is going to happen? You write your comments. You let me know what you think. I'm going to head to bed. So you guys, thank you for watching and bearing with me. It's been a long video, but thank you for watching. And hello to all my subscribers. Again, thank you for what you do and what you say. I mean, I love talking to all of you. And thank you to anyone who watches the video. Anyways, I'm going to head out and have the rest of my tea and get some sleep. So you guys take